Pope Francis has just issued an order that many see as something diabolical, an irreversible reform imposed from above that could change the face of the Church forever. But this time, there is no silence. Catholic journalists, priests, and believers begin to speak out, and the alarm is global. Perhaps for the first time, someone has the courage to say enough. Stay with me, because what is happening is more serious and more dangerous than they would have us believe. Pope Francis has just given the green light to a new phase of the Synod on synodality, that tentacled creature that continually changes shape but has a single goal: to refound the Church from below, emptying it from above. Francis, or whoever he is, because let's be clear, it's not even certain who is really governing anymore, is not acting alone. What we are seeing is a systematic, lucid, organized vision. Too many men involved, too many interests at stake. It is not improvisation, it is strategy, and the goal seems increasingly clear. The term used is accompaniment, but it is a forced march. No diocese, no parish will be able to avoid it. By 2028, we will arrive at a universal ecclesial assembly, a new unprecedented body in which bishops will no longer be the majority. The episcopate, an apostolic structure founded by Christ, reduced to one of the many components of the people of God, placed on a par with lay people selected by whom? By Rome, obviously. It is a paradigm shift that is not even being hidden. The promoters speak of proposals that will be submitted to the pontiff in office in 2028, and this already betrays the awareness that the days of the current pontificate are numbered. But what is most disturbing is the enthusiasm with which this process is described as without a way out. There is no turning back, there is no disagreement, there is no standing still. We must walk together, which translated means we must align ourselves. The revolution, to be called such, must be permanent. And this one is. And it is precisely at this point, when the synodal machine accelerates and the triumphalistic tones of Rome speak of accompaniment and shared paths, that decisive voices begin to be raised. No more murmurings among the pews or anonymous comments on blogs. This time, it is priests, religious, Catholic journalists, scholars, and committed lay people who publicly raise the tone. They are not having it. They do not accept yet another revolution passed off as an update. And they openly denounce the mortal risk that is being run, that of transforming the Church from a bride of Christ into a fluid and horizontal social project, devoid of authority, doctrine, identity. Among the first to sound the alarm was Father Gerald Murray, an expert canonist and an authoritative voice in ecclesial debates. His analysis is cutting. Behind the new Universal Ecclesial Assembly announced for 2028 lies a precise plan, that of replacing episcopal authority with a mixed assembly in which bishops count less than lay delegates chosen for their synodal sensitivity. In practice, the hierarchy desired by Christ is placed under the tutelage of a manipulated democracy, and the Synod, instead of helping the Pope, as foreseen by the Second Vatican Council, is transformed into a parallel structure, capable of deciding, perhaps by votes, what previously belonged to the magisterium. Murray is clear. This is not Catholic. It is a dangerous experiment, which risks Protestantizing the Church, depriving it of its own divine constitution. The term he uses is unequivocal, destructive. It is not a question of reform, but of dismantling. And like him, others are starting to speak out, because the time for silence is over. Alongside Father Murray, there are well-known names in the Catholic world who have been observing the synodal drift with surgical lucidity for years to raise the alarm. One above all, Diane Montagna, one of the most feared journalists at Vatican press conferences, who is not enchanted by the clichés or diplomatic smiles of the cardinals. It was she who made the protagonists of the synod sweat coldly, asking direct, uncomfortable questions, which were often answered with embarrassed silences or words that said everything except the truth. And then there are editorialists like Matthew Hazel, who with cutting irony has underlined the absurdity of the synodal imposition. You can't get out of synodality, they say, but no one has ever bothered to actually get in. The vast majority of the faithful parish priests and dioceses have ignored this entire synodal circus, not out of bad faith or laziness, but because they found it useless, empty, and far from any real need. And yet, the order comes from above. Go ahead anyway. We'll do it anyway. It doesn't matter if the people don't listen. The important thing is to pretend to listen to them. Phil Lawler, another close observer, sums up the situation with bitter irony. Nothing says listen and consult like a diktat that imposes mandatory participation even on those who think it's all a waste of time, or worse. The point is precisely this. For many believers, this whole process is not only useless, it is harmful. Because it waters down faith, replaces the supernatural with the sociological, and distances souls from Christ in the name of a very vague communion made up of opinions and group relationships. Among these priests who choose not to remain silent, there is also Father Joachim Heimel, an Austrian theologian who has long published scathing interventions against the genetic mutation underway in the Church. His words leave no room for misunderstanding. What is happening under the name of synodality is not a reform, but a true and proper theology of power, in perfect harmony, he says, with the Promethean vision of modern man, the one that sees man at the center of everything and God relegated to the background, impotent and annoying. A vision, he adds, which does not arise from the gospel, but from Goethe, and which today seems to have become the implicit dogma of the new synodal church. Heimel warns against a self-deification disguised as participation. One no longer listens to God, one listens to oneself. One no longer seeks the divine will, but one elevates one's own subjective conscience to a rule in perfect serpentine style. You will be like God. This, he says, is the poisonous root of the new course. Synodality thus becomes the instrument for an anthropocentric revolution, where it is no longer God who creates man in his image, but man who recreates God according to his own impulses. And in this game of mirrors, everything becomes negotiable. Morality, liturgy, even the priesthood. A lucid analysis which does not come from an angry traditionalist, but from a priest who knows the history of the church and the mechanisms of power well. And that, precisely for this reason, knows how to recognize the signs of deception when they reappear in new guises. This is why, in his speech, Heimel speaks openly of a Luciferian rebellion. Strong words, certainly, but perhaps the only language still capable of waking up those who persist in sleeping in front of a fire. Meanwhile, while the mantra of the listening church is spreading from Rome, the reality on the ground tells a completely different story. The numbers speak clearly, and they are merciless. The seminarians decrease year after year, Vocations collapse, parishes empty, nuns disappear. Yet none of the supporters of the new course seem to ask the simplest and most urgent question: why? Not how to reorganize pastoral care, not which synodal instruments to adopt, but why do people leave? Why are vocations drying up? Why is faith dying out? What do you think? If you liked the video, comment, Amen. God bless you.